9 powerful earthquakes, 1 restless planet, and 1 question scientists are still trying to answer. Something unusual happened this week. The Earth shook in 7 different regions within just a few hours. Kamchatka, Japan, Mexico, New Zealand, all struck within hours. Coincidence or something bigger?
In a single overnight stretch this week, the ground moved in Japan, in Kamchatka, in New Zealand, in Mexico, in Papua New Guinea, in Guatemala, and in the middle of the Philippine Sea. 9 separate magnitude 5 or greater earthquakes scattered across the planet within hours of each other. On July 28th, one of those quakes tore into the Japanese island of Kyushu and pulled down part of a shopping mall with people still inside. And when I started reading what seismologists were actually saying about all of it, I expected a tidy explanation. I did not get one. Stay with me, because the reason they don't have one yet is more interesting than any single earthquake. Here's the assumption almost everyone brings to a week like this. When you see a run of earthquakes light up the map in country after country, it feels like something. It feels connected. It feels like the planet is winding up towards something bigger, like these quakes are talking to each other across oceans. That instinct is completely human, and it is also, according to the people who study this for a living, almost certainly wrong. Earthquakes on opposite sides of the Earth do not trigger each other in any meaningful way. A magnitude 6.8 in Japan does not load the fault under Kamchatka. The distances are too vast, the energy drops off too fast, and the faults are on entirely different tectonic clocks. So the obvious answer, the one that makes for a scary headline, falls apart the moment you look at the physics, which leaves a genuinely harder question underneath. I spent hours going through this, cross-checking the raw catalogs against the news reporting, and I want to lay out only what every source actually agrees on. The Kumamoto earthquake struck Japan's Kyushu Island on July 28, 2026, at a shallow depth of about 10 kilometers. Early reports put it near magnitude 7.1, and it's now listed at magnitude 6.8 in the compiled record. Either way, shallow and strong is a brutal combination. Japan's meteorological agency issued tsunami advisories for the Ariake and Yatsushiro seas, then lifted them about 2 hours later when no significant waves came. Part of an Aeon Mall in Kashima town collapsed. At least 35 people were killed. And separately, in the 24 hours around July 30th and 31st, the global catalogs logged 9 quakes above magnitude 5 and nearly 90 above magnitude 4, spread across the Pacific and beyond. Those are the undisputed facts. Everything past that gets murkier. And here's where the reporting starts to disagree with itself. I read through the wire coverage, the specialist earthquake bulletins, and the survey data, and they do not tell the same story about what it means. Some outlets framed the week as an alarming surge, 9 strong quakes within hours, language built to make your stomach drop. The scientific bulletins framed the exact same 24 hours as, essentially, a Tuesday. No quakes above magnitude 6 in that window. Total energy release equivalent to a single magnitude 6.2 event. So which is it, a dangerous cluster or an ordinary day on a restless planet? That contradiction is the whole story, and it doesn't resolve the way you'd expect. Let me walk you through the explanations actually on the table, because there are 3 real ones and a 4th that scientists take just as seriously. But first I need to show you the ground itself, because you can't judge any of these theories without understanding where these quakes are happening. Almost every earthquake I just listed sits on one enormous feature, the Pacific Ring of Fire. Picture a horseshoe of fault lines and volcanoes wrapped around nearly the entire Pacific Ocean, running up through Chile and Mexico and Guatemala, along the coast of North America, across to Kamchatka and down through Japan, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and New Zealand. This is where tectonic plates grind, dive beneath one another, and lock and slip. Japan alone experiences roughly 20% of the world's magnitude 6 and greater earthquakes while occupying less than 1% of Earth's land area. Let that land for a second. One country, a 5th of the planet's big quakes. Kyushu, where Kumamoto sits, is a place where multiple plate boundaries and inland faults crowd together, And this same region was devastated in 2016 by a pair of earthquakes that killed more than 50 people. The ground here doesn't need a special reason to move. Movement is its baseline. So when you see this week's map, you're not seeing a new pattern. You're seeing the Ring of Fire doing the one thing it always does, just compressed into a headline. But that raises the real question. If the shaking is normal, why can't scientists just say so and close the case? Here's the honest breakdown of what they're weighing. The first explanation is the simplest and, frankly, the most likely. This is coincidence riding on top of a constant. Earth produces well over 100,000 earthquakes above magnitude for every single year. Do the arithmetic, and that's hundreds a day. When you watch any random week closely enough, clusters appear purely by chance, the same way flipping a coin long enough will hand you streaks of heads. The leading view among seismologists is that a week of scattered global quakes is what randomness looks like when a nervous public is paying attention. Nothing links Guatemala to Kamchatka except our tendency to draw lines between dots. The second explanation is more specific and more solid. What's happening in Kumamoto specifically is an aftershock sequence, and that part is not mysterious at all. After a large shallow quake, the surrounding crust readjusts, producing a cascade of smaller quakes that decay in size and frequency over days and weeks. The record already shows this, with a magnitude 5.0 striking just south of Kumamoto on July 30th. That's textbook. Scientists have documented this decay pattern for over a century, and it's one of the few things about earthquakes we can describe with real mathematical confidence. Japanese authorities warned residents to expect exactly this, and to stay away from already weakened buildings. The third explanation is the one people reach for, and the one that mostly doesn't hold: long-range triggering. There is real science showing that the seismic waves from a very large earthquake can, occasionally, nudge faults thousands of kilometers away into slipping slightly sooner than they would have. But the effect is small, short-lived, and generally tied to genuinely massive events. There was no magnitude 8 this week to act as a trigger. So while triggering is real in principle, most researchers would tell you it's not what's stitching this particular week together. And then there's the fourth option, the one I think is the most intellectually honest. For any given cluster, sometimes the answer is, we're still working it out. The U.S. Geological Survey's own volcano scientists published a piece this year walking through how they distinguish an ordinary tectonic sequence from a swarm that might signal magma on the move, and their conclusion is telling. You have to ask where it is, how the quakes behave over time, and whether that spot has a history. Even then, some swarms behave in ways that blur the categories. What we have, in other words, are competing explanations, not a single settled answer. And no one is going to pretend otherwise just to make a week feel tidy. So which is it? For this week, the honest composite answer is mostly coincidence, plus one very real aftershock sequence in Japan, with no evidence of anything linking the regions together. Not a satisfying villain, but the correct one. Now, the comparison that stopped me cold while researching. Go back to April 2016, to these exact same hills in Kumamoto. A magnitude 6.2 struck on a Thursday night. People evacuated, then many returned home believing the worst was over, because that first quake felt like the main event. Roughly 28 hours later, a magnitude 7.0 hit the same area, and it turned out the first quake had not been the main shock at all. It had been a foreshock. More than 50 people died, many in buildings already cracked by the first jolt. Here's why that history matters this week. It's the reason Japanese officials this time immediately warned people to stay out of damaged structures and to brace for strong aftershocks rather than assuming the danger had passed. The 2016 sequence rewrote the local playbook. And it's the cleanest illustration of a hard truth in this science. At the moment an earthquake happens, you cannot know for certain whether it's the biggest one coming or just the opening act. That uncertainty isn't a gap in Japanese monitoring, which is among the best on Earth. It's a gap in what physics currently allows anyone to know. Let's put some numbers around how routine and how not routine this really is. In a typical year, the planet logs somewhere around 15 to 18 large earthquakes of magnitude 7 or above, while over 100 in the 6 to 6.9 range, and many hundreds in the 5s. This year's running tally sits right inside that historical band. A magnitude 7 quake happens on average, more than once a month somewhere in the world. So a single magnitude 6.8 in Japan, viewed against the long record, is not a statistical anomaly at all. What about forecasting the next one? This is where I have to be careful and precise. Scientists cannot predict earthquakes. What agencies like the USGS and Japan's Meteorological Agency issue instead are aftershock probabilities, statements like the chance of another strong quake in a given region over the next week, expressed as a percentage that falls off steadily with time. That's the only responsible kind of forecast that exists, and anyone offering you a date and a magnitude is selling something science cannot deliver. Which brings me to how they actually study this, because it's less crystal ball and more detective work. When a sequence starts, seismologists pull the precise locations and depths of every quake and watch how the pattern evolves in space and time. A tectonic sequence tends to open with a main shock and taper into decaying aftershocks. A volcanic swarm tends to arrive in bursts and drumbeats without a single dominant shock. They check whether the spot sits near an active volcano or geothermal system, and whether it has swarmed before. The USGS noted that some California swarm zones have a documented history going back to 1970. It's pattern matching against decades of catalog, not prophecy. And here's a number worth actually feeling, because magnitude fools almost everyone. The scale isn't linear, it's logarithmic. Each whole step up multiplies the ground-shaking amplitude by about 10, but the actual energy released jumps by roughly 32 times. So a magnitude 7 doesn't release a little more energy than a magnitude 6. It releases about 32 times more. Go up a full 2 steps, from a 5 to a 7, and you're looking at roughly 1,000 times the energy. That's why this week's dozens of magnitude 4 and -5 quakes, added all together, still released less total energy than one single moderate event. The big ones aren't just bigger. They're in a different universe. It's exactly why a shallow near 7 under a populated Japanese city is a disaster, while a swarm of 4s barely makes the local news. So what do you actually do with all this? A few things worth carrying with you. If you live anywhere on the Ring of Fire, the practical takeaway isn't fear, it's Japan's own lesson. After a significant quake, treat the first shock as possibly not the last, and stay out of damaged buildings until they're cleared. Know that tsunami advisories after a coastal quake are precautionary and often lifted within hours, so follow official guidance rather than rumor. And when you next see a headline stringing together quakes from 5 countries into one ominous pattern, you now have the tool to read it correctly. Ask whether the events are physically connected or simply simultaneous. Almost always, they're simply simultaneous. Here's the reframe I want to leave you with. This week was not the planet winding up towards something. And it was not silent warnings finally being heard. It was the Ring of Fire doing precisely what it has done for millions of years, indifferent to our calendars and our headlines, and one genuinely serious quake in Japan reminding a region that has learned this the hard way to respect the ground beneath it. The connection our minds want to draw between Kumamoto and Kamchatka doesn't exist. What exists instead is a planet in constant, uneven motion, and a science honest enough to say when it can explain a pattern and when it can only watch. The mystery in the title isn't a cover-up. It's the frontier. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever personally felt an earthquake? And where were you? And what did it actually feel like when the ground moved? Tell me in the comments, because those first-hand accounts are some of the best learning in this whole channel. If underreported Earth science stories like this matter to you, subscribe, because tracking exactly these events as they unfold is what we do here. And let's aim for 1,000 likes on this one, so it reaches people who keep seeing these scary cluster headlines and deserve the real picture. I'll keep watching the